It did not come across there. And I changed because I peed in my pants. I mean, you cannot tell. I screamed like...
Long before the red carpets, record-breaking paychecks, and flashing cameras, Julia Roberts was just a young girl growing up in the small town of Smyrna, Georgia. Her family wasn't wealthy, and life wasn't nearly as glamorous as many people later imagined. Acting surrounded her from an early age because both of her parents ran a small theater workshop, where future stars occasionally passed through. But tragedy arrived early when her father passed away while she was still a child, leaving the family to navigate difficult years. No one could have predicted that the shy girl with a wide smile would one day become the biggest actress on earth. After finishing school, she packed her belongings and moved to New York City with little more than determination, taking modeling jobs while auditioning for anything she could find. Rejections piled up, money was tight, and success felt incredibly distant. Still, Julia refused to give up, unaware that one unexpected audition was about to change not only her life, but Hollywood itself, and that breakthrough came faster than anyone expected. When Pretty Woman premiered in 1990, nobody expected it to become one of the biggest cultural phenomena of the decade. Almost overnight, Julia Roberts transformed from an up-and-coming actress into Hollywood's newest obsession. Audiences weren't just watching the movie, they were falling in love with her infectious smile, effortless charm, and unmistakable screen presence. Producers quickly realized something remarkable. People weren't buying tickets because of the story alone. They were buying tickets because Julia Roberts was in it. Offers flooded in from every major studio, each hoping to secure Hollywood's brightest new star before someone else did. Magazine covers, television interviews, and award ceremonies suddenly became part of her daily life. Yet behind the excitement, fame arrived with shocking speed, leaving almost no time to adjust. The world celebrated her success, but very few understood how overwhelming such instant celebrity could become. And as her popularity exploded, so did the pressure that came with being Hollywood's favorite actress. Most actors dream of landing one blockbuster. Julia Roberts seemed to deliver one after another. Throughout the 1990s, films like Steel Magnolias, My Best Friend's Wedding, Notting Hill, and Runaway Bride cemented her position as the undisputed queen of romantic comedies while proving she could handle emotional drama just as effortlessly. Before long, executives weren't simply casting Julia, they were building entire productions around her availability. Insiders even admitted that if Julia agreed to star in a project, financing suddenly became much easier because investors trusted her name to draw audiences worldwide. That kind of influence is almost unheard of, even among Hollywood's biggest legends. She wasn't simply successful. She had become what the industry called a green light, someone whose signature alone could launch multi-million-dollar productions. But incredible power always carries an invisible cost, and Julia was beginning to discover that every new success invited even greater scrutiny. What looked like a dream career from the outside was quietly becoming something much more complicated. To millions of fans, Julia Roberts appeared to be living the perfect life. She had blockbuster movies, worldwide fame, and enough influence to shape Hollywood itself. But behind the headlines, her personal life was disappearing. Every relationship became front-page news, every vacation attracted photographers, every public appearance generated endless speculation from tabloids determined to create the next sensational story. There was no such thing as a private moment anymore. Julia later admitted that she understood fame came with sacrifices, but even she couldn't have imagined just how relentless the attention would become. She once reflected that living a normal life would have been much easier if she'd chosen an ordinary profession instead of acting. It wasn't the work that exhausted her, it was the feeling that strangers believed they owned every moment of her life. The higher her career climbed, the more she questioned whether unlimited success was truly worth the personal cost. Then, one unexpected decision on a movie set stunned Hollywood and revealed a side of Julia almost nobody understood. Just as Julia Roberts seemed unstoppable, she made a decision that left Hollywood executives completely stunned. At only 24 years old, She was attached to star in Shakespeare in Love, a project many believed would become another career-defining hit. She was deeply invested in the role and reportedly hoped Daniel Day-Lewis would play opposite her. But when that vision failed to come together, something changed. According to people involved with the production, Julia gradually lost confidence in the project. Rather than forcing herself through months of filming while feeling uncertain, she made an extraordinary choice. She walked away entirely. The production collapsed. Millions had already been spent, and many believed she'd made the biggest mistake of her career. Years later, the film was revived with another cast, won multiple Academy Awards, and its leading actress took home the Oscar Julia might have received. Yet surprisingly, Roberts never publicly expressed regret. Looking back, that moment wasn't simply about one movie. It revealed a personal rule she would follow for the rest of her career. If something didn't feel right, she was willing to walk away, no matter how much was at stake. And that philosophy would soon lead her to the biggest turning point of her entire life. By the year 2000, Julia Roberts had climbed to a place no woman in Hollywood had ever reached before. Her unforgettable performance in Erin Brockovich wasn't just another hit, it became a cultural phenomenon. Critics praised her fearless portrayal of a single mother taking on powerful corporations, while audiences packed theaters around the world. Awards followed one after another, culminating in the Academy Award for Best Actress. But another milestone made even bigger headlines. Julia became the first female actor in Hollywood history to earn $20 million for a single film, breaking a barrier that had existed for decades. It wasn't simply about the money, it was proof that a woman could command the same financial respect as Hollywood's biggest male stars. Studios no longer questioned her value because she had already proven it beyond doubt. From the outside, it looked like she had finally conquered every mountain imaginable. Yet deep inside, Julia had already begun asking a completely different question. If she'd achieved everything she'd ever dreamed of, what was left to chase? The answer arrived unexpectedly while filming a movie far from Hollywood's bright lights. In 2001, Julia Roberts traveled to Mexico to film The Mexican, expecting nothing more than another successful project. Instead, she encountered the person who would quietly reshape the rest of her life. His name was Danny Motter, a talented cinematographer who worked behind the camera rather than standing in front of it. Unlike the celebrities Julia constantly met, Danny wasn't interested in fame, headlines, or glamorous Hollywood parties. He focused on his craft, valued privacy, and lived a life far removed from the spotlight she had grown accustomed to. Their connection developed naturally, built on shared conversations instead of public attention. For Julia, it felt refreshingly different from anything she'd experienced before. She would later describe meeting Danny as one of the most significant turning points of her entire life. They married on July 4, 2002, in a private ceremony surrounded by close family and friends, avoiding the extravagant spectacle many expected. While the entertainment world celebrated another celebrity wedding, few realized this wasn't simply a new relationship. It marked the beginning of Julia's complete shift in priorities. And within just a few years, another life-changing role would become far more important than any character she could ever play on screen. Winning Oscars had brought Julia Roberts worldwide recognition, but nothing prepared her for becoming a mother. In 2004, she and Danny welcomed twins, Hazel and Phineas, and just a few years later, their son Henry completed the family. Overnight, the center of Julia's world shifted away from movie premieres and toward bedtime stories, school mornings, family dinners, and everyday moments that rarely make magazine covers. For the first time in decades, her schedule wasn't built around production calendars, it revolved around her children's lives. Friends noticed she seemed happier than ever, embracing ordinary routines with genuine excitement. She wasn't pretending to enjoy family life for publicity. She truly cherished every moment away from Hollywood's constant demands. Julia later admitted that because she'd already spent nearly 2 decades building her career, she felt incredibly fortunate to have the freedom to pause and simply be present for her family. Success had given her something even more valuable than wealth. It had given her choices. That freedom soon led to a series of decisions that confused Hollywood but made perfect sense to Julia. As Julia Roberts settled into family life, something unusual began happening behind the scenes. Studios continued offering her leading roles, massive paychecks, and blockbuster projects, but again and again, the answer was the same: no. Rumors quickly spread that Hollywood had lost interest in its former queen, but insiders knew the truth couldn't have been more different. The offers never stopped arriving. Julia simply became incredibly selective about accepting them. Every script had to pass a new test. Was the story truly worth months away from her husband and children? Could filming fit around school schedules, vacations, and family commitments? If the answer was no, the project disappeared from consideration regardless of the paycheck attached to it. Walking away from millions of dollars might seem unimaginable to most people, but Julia believed time with her family was something money could never replace. Those decisions puzzled many observers, yet she never appeared conflicted. She knew exactly what mattered most, and despite what many believed, stepping back from Hollywood didn't mean she had disappeared altogether. For years, headlines suggested Julia Roberts had quietly vanished from the entertainment industry, but a closer look reveals something completely different. She wasn't disappearing. She was becoming exceptionally selective. When the right opportunity appeared, she returned with performances that reminded everyone why she'd become one of Hollywood's greatest stars in the first place. She starred alongside Lucas Hedges in the emotional drama Ben is Back, delivered an Emmy-nominated performance as Martha Mitchell in the political series Gaslit, reunited with George Clooney for the global hit Ticket to Paradise, and later captivated audiences in Netflix's psychological thriller Leave the World Behind. None of these projects were chosen by accident. Each one offered something unique, challenging, or personally meaningful. Julia no longer measured success by how many films she released each year. Instead, she asked one simple question: is this worth leaving my family for? That single standard completely transformed her career. But even after all those years, many people still misunderstood why she'd made those choices. And Julia was finally ready to explain the truth herself. As the years passed, a strange narrative began spreading through Hollywood. Entertainment magazines and online commentators claimed Julia Roberts had slowly faded from relevance, suggesting younger stars had replaced her and that the phone had simply stopped ringing. It made for an interesting headline, but it wasn't the reality. Behind the scenes, studios were still eager to cast one of the most bankable actresses of her generation. Producers knew that even after years of working less frequently, Julia's name still carried enormous respect with audiences around the world. The difference wasn't a lack of opportunity, it was a change in her priorities. Instead of chasing every major role, she carefully evaluated each project against the life she had built at home. Fame no longer dictated her decisions, her family did. She had reached a point where success wasn't measured by constant visibility, but by having the freedom to choose exactly how she spent her time. Ironically, the public mistook that freedom for decline, when in reality, it was something many stars spend their entire careers trying to achieve. Then Julia finally addressed the speculation herself, and her explanation changed the conversation overnight. For years, fans wondered why Julia Roberts had stepped away just when it seemed she could have ruled Hollywood forever. The answer finally came during a candid interview, where she spoke with remarkable honesty about the choices she'd made. There was no dramatic revelation or hidden scandal, just a simple truth that many people had overlooked. Julia explained that because her greatest career success came early, she had the rare privilege of slowing down when her children were young. She didn't feel forced to choose between work and family because years of dedication had already given her financial security and creative freedom. Rather than expressing regret over the roles she declined, she spoke with genuine gratitude for the years she spent at home. She described those moments not as sacrifices, but as priceless opportunities she knew many working parents never receive. It was a perspective that surprised countless fans who had assumed she secretly missed the spotlight. Instead, Julia made it clear she wouldn't trade those years for another blockbuster or another award. Once those words were heard, Many of her earlier decisions suddenly made perfect sense. The more Julia Roberts spoke about fame, the easier it became to understand the person behind the celebrity. She often described herself as an ordinary woman with an extraordinary job, a simple sentence that revealed far more than most people realized. While Hollywood encouraged stars to make fame their entire identity, Julia refused to let that happen. She appreciated the opportunities acting gave her, but she never believed celebrity should define who she was. That's why she guarded her private life so carefully and avoided turning every personal moment into public entertainment. Friends often noticed that when filming ended, Julia didn't linger in the spotlight searching for attention. She returned home, focused on her family, and embraced everyday routines that many celebrities spend years trying to escape. To outsiders, her lifestyle seemed surprisingly normal considering her legendary status. But for Julia, normality wasn't something to avoid. It was something worth protecting at all costs. That mindset quietly influenced every major decision she made, even if the public didn't recognize it at the time. And those closest to her say the real Julia Roberts has always been very different from the image Hollywood created. Ask people who've worked closely with Julia Roberts, and a remarkably consistent picture begins to emerge. Co-stars, directors, and longtime friends rarely describe her first as a superstar. Instead, they talk about her kindness, her humor, and her ability to make everyone around her feel comfortable. George Clooney has often joked about their easy friendship, while directors have praised her professionalism and willingness to collaborate rather than dominate a production. Crew members frequently recall that she treated everyone, from assistants to camera operators, with genuine respect, regardless of their position. Those stories stand in sharp contrast to the glamorous image often projected by celebrity culture. Off-camera, Julia seemed happiest sharing meals with friends, spending time with her children, or enjoying quiet moments away from flashing cameras. She never appeared interested in proving she was Hollywood royalty, because she had nothing left to prove. Perhaps that's why so many people who've actually known her describe the same woman: confident, grounded, and surprisingly down-to-earth. That quiet confidence eventually gave her the courage to redefine what success really meant on her own terms. By the time Julia Roberts entered the next stage of her career, she no longer felt any pressure to compete with younger stars or chase box office records. She had already experienced the highest highs Hollywood could offer, from record-breaking salaries to Academy Award victories. Instead of asking which project would make the most money, she started asking which one genuinely excited her. That subtle shift changed everything. Scripts were no longer judged by their commercial potential, but by the challenge they offered, and whether they justified time away from the people she loved most. Some years passed with very few appearances, while others brought carefully selected performances that reminded audiences of her extraordinary talent. To many observers, her career seemed quieter than before. But from Julia's perspective, it had become richer than ever because every role reflected a conscious choice rather than an obligation. She wasn't trying to remain the biggest star in Hollywood anymore. She was simply creating work that mattered to her. That philosophy would soon lead her to one of the boldest and most unexpected projects of her entire career. After years of carefully choosing projects, Julia Roberts surprised Hollywood by accepting one of the most demanding roles of her career. She teamed up with acclaimed director Luca Guadagnino for After the Hunt, a psychological drama that tackled difficult moral questions rather than offering easy answers. It wasn't the kind of film designed to dominate the box office or attract casual audiences. Instead, it challenged viewers to wrestle with uncomfortable situations and complex emotions. Julia knew exactly what she was signing up for. At this point in her career, she wasn't searching for another blockbuster. She was searching for stories that pushed her as an actress. Critics who watched early screenings praised the depth and restraint of her performance, with many calling it one of her strongest in years. Yet despite the positive attention surrounding Julia herself, the movie faced an uphill battle once it reached theaters. And what happened after its release proved just how much her definition of success had changed. When After the Hunt arrived in theaters, expectations were high, but the results were disappointing. Ticket sales never reached the level the studio had hoped for, and the film struggled to connect with mainstream audiences. In Hollywood, commercial setbacks often trigger panic, finger-pointing, or desperate attempts to explain what went wrong. But Julia Roberts reacted very differently. She didn't distance herself from the project, or pretend it had never happened. Instead, she spoke proudly about working with Luca Guadagnino and described the collaboration as a dream she had wanted to fulfill for years. That response revealed something remarkable. Earlier in her career, box office numbers might have defined the conversation around one of her films. Now, personal fulfillment mattered far more than financial success. She measured the experience by the people she worked with, the story she helped tell, and the creative risks she was willing to take. That perspective stunned many observers because it reflected complete confidence rather than concern. By then, it had become obvious that Julia was playing an entirely different game from the rest of Hollywood. The entertainment industry Julia conquered in the 1990s barely exists today. Movie stars once carried entire films on their shoulders, while audiences flocked to theaters simply because of a familiar name on the poster. Streaming platforms, social media, and changing viewing habits have transformed that landscape completely. Franchises often attract bigger crowds than individual actors, and the era of the traditional movie superstar has become increasingly rare. Yet Julia Roberts remains one of the few names that still command immediate recognition across generations. Younger audiences continue discovering her classic films, while longtime fans remain eager to see whatever she chooses next. Instead of struggling to keep up with Hollywood's rapid evolution, Julia quietly adapted by embracing projects that interested her without worrying about industry trends. She no longer needed to prove she belonged because her legacy had already been secured decades earlier. Ironically, stepping back from constant exposure only made people appreciate her even more. And that lasting influence reaches far beyond the movies she starred in. Julia Roberts' greatest impact on Hollywood can't be measured by ticket sales alone. She helped redefine what female stars could achieve at a time when leading actresses rarely received the same opportunities or the same pay as their male counterparts. By becoming the first woman to earn a $20 million salary for a single film, she shattered an invisible ceiling that had existed for generations. Countless actresses who followed benefited from the precedent she helped establish. Beyond financial milestones, she also transformed the romantic comedy genre, creating performances that remain beloved decades later. Her smile became one of cinema's most recognizable images, and her characters inspired audiences across the world. Yet perhaps the most impressive part of her legacy isn't found on an awards shelf or inside a studio vault. It's the example she set by refusing to let fame control every aspect of her life. She showed that even at the highest level of success, it's possible to step back without losing yourself. And that lesson became even clearer through the life she chose away from Hollywood's spotlight. While many celebrities spent years chasing even greater fame, Julia Roberts was quietly building something far more difficult to achieve: a stable, private family life. For more than 2 decades, she and Danny Moder have maintained one of Hollywood's strongest marriages despite constant public attention. Together, they've raised their children largely outside the glare of celebrity culture, giving them the chance to experience as normal an upbringing as possible. Julia has often spoken about how much she treasures ordinary moments, from family dinners to simple days spent at home. Those experiences became more valuable to her than another blockbuster premiere or another magazine cover. Looking back, it's clear that every major decision, from turning down lucrative roles to becoming fiercely selective about new projects, was guided by one simple goal: protecting the life she'd built with the people she loved most. To outsiders, it may have looked like she walked away from Hollywood. In reality, she was walking toward the future she had always wanted. And when Julia finally reflected on those choices, she revealed the powerful truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. For decades, people assumed Julia Roberts must secretly regret stepping away during the height of her career. After all, who willingly walks away from unlimited opportunities, massive paychecks, and worldwide admiration? But every interview she's given tells a completely different story. Whenever she's asked about those years, there's no hint of bitterness or longing. Instead, she speaks with warmth, gratitude, and a quiet confidence that can't be faked. She has often explained that raising her children wasn't something she squeezed into her schedule. It became the schedule. Looking back, she doesn't measure those years by the movies she declined, but by the memories she gained. First days of school, family vacations, birthdays, ordinary evenings around the dinner table, those became the moments she treasures most. In an industry where many stars chase success for a lifetime, Julia had already achieved it and discovered that fulfillment wasn't waiting at another premiere. It was waiting at home. That realization became the foundation of every decision she made afterward. But one simple quote explains her entire philosophy better than anything else she's ever said. Among the countless interviews Julia Roberts has given over the years, one statement stands above all the rest because it quietly answered the question fans had been asking for decades. She explained that she felt incredibly fortunate to have the luxury of staying home with her family during the years when her children needed her most. At first glance, those words seem simple, almost ordinary. But hidden inside them is a perspective that's incredibly rare in Hollywood. Julia wasn't talking about sacrificing her career or giving something up. She was talking about gratitude. She understood that very few people, inside or outside the entertainment industry, ever get to make such a choice freely. Success had given her something money couldn't buy: control over her own life. Instead of allowing Hollywood to dictate her future, she decided what success would look like for herself. That quiet decision challenged one of the entertainment industry's biggest assumptions: that bigger careers always lead to happier lives. And once you understand that mindset, every chapter of Julia's journey suddenly fits together like pieces of the same puzzle. Looking back now, it's remarkable how consistent Julia Roberts has been throughout her entire career. The signs were never hidden, they simply weren't understood at the time. When she walked away from Shakespeare in Love, many people believed she'd made a reckless mistake. Years later, when she repeatedly turned down blockbuster roles, critics claimed Hollywood had moved on without her. Then, after becoming increasingly selective about the projects she accepted, some assumed her best years were behind her. But every one of those moments pointed toward the same philosophy. Julia wasn't making emotional decisions in the heat of the moment. She was following an inner compass that valued authenticity over expectations. If a project didn't feel right, she walked away. If a role demanded too much time away from her family, she declined. If a story genuinely inspired her, she embraced it wholeheartedly, regardless of its commercial potential. The pattern had been there from the beginning. It simply took years for people to recognize it. And that realization completely changes the story everyone thought they knew. Perhaps the biggest misconception about Julia Roberts is the idea that Hollywood somehow left her behind. The truth is almost the exact opposite. Even after decades in the industry, producers continued offering her major roles because they knew her talent hadn't faded. But by then, Julia had something many successful people never achieve: the freedom to say no without fear. She wasn't disappearing from Hollywood, she was refusing to let Hollywood control her life anymore. That's an important distinction. Most actors spend their careers hoping to reach a point where they can choose only the projects they truly love. Julia actually reached that point, and instead of chasing endless success, she used it to create the life she wanted. That choice confused audiences because it challenged everything celebrity culture teaches us. We often assume the goal is always more fame, more money, and more recognition. Julia quietly proved that sometimes the greatest achievement is knowing when you've already accomplished enough. And that brings us to the most powerful lesson hidden inside her extraordinary journey. When history remembers Julia Roberts, people will undoubtedly recall the unforgettable smile, the blockbuster films, the Academy Award, and the record-breaking career that changed Hollywood forever. But those accomplishments tell only half the story. The more remarkable achievement happened after she'd already reached the top. Instead of allowing fame to define the rest of her life, she chose something far more meaningful: freedom. Freedom to raise her children, protect her marriage, pursue only the work she truly believed in, and live according to her own values rather than Hollywood's expectations. That's why the mystery surrounding her so-called disappearance was never really a mystery at all. She didn't walk away because the opportunities disappeared. She walked away because she finally had the power to decide what mattered most. In a world that constantly encourages people to chase more, Julia Roberts reminds us that true success isn't measured by how long you stay in the spotlight. Sometimes, the greatest victory is having the courage to step away from it and never regret the decision.